Welcome to What the F is Going On in Latin America and the Caribbean. Today's episode, Honduras votes as U.S. military expands across the Caribbean. This episode is in broadcast partnership with Friends of Latin America and will be in English and Spanish. For those of you joining us on Zoom, please use the interpretation icon. And also just to let everyone know who's joined us this evening, that we will be premiering the English version on Code Pink YouTube Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern. So let me give all of you a little bit of background before I introduce our co-host and guest. Elections taking place November 30th in Honduras will decide the country's next president and makeup of the National Assembly. Trump's headline-grabbing gunboat diplomacy in the Caribbean distracts from the quieter, more covert maneuvers the U.S. is taking to destabilize progressive governments elsewhere in Latin America, moves that the U.S. corporate press has largely ignored. One such effort involves manufacturing enough unrest to clear the way for a neoliberal candidate to be installed as the quote-unquote legitimate winner with Washington's blessing in Honduras on November 30th. These elections cannot be viewed in isolation. They unfold amid rising regional tensions between the United States, Colombia, Venezuela, and now Mexico, as we saw last Saturday, all while U.S. military actively expands across the Caribbean, fueling an already volatile political climate. So everyone, we are really honored to welcome two guests from Honduras for this episode, and will be able to give us some wonderful historical context leading up to elections on November 30th. And again, these will be presidential and National Assembly. So before we introduce our guests, I want you all to meet Roxanne Hughes-Wheatland. She will be my co-host this evening, and she is with Friends of Latin America, our co-broadcasting partner this evening. So welcome, Roxanne.
Oh, thank you so much, Terry, for the opportunity to co-host today.
Oh, it's great to have you here.
Great. Hello, everyone. I am delighted to introduce our two distinguished guests today, Bertha Oliva de Netavi and Natalie Roku Sandoval. Bertha Olivia de Netavi is the General Coordinator and co-founder of the Committee of Relatives of the Detained and Disappeared in Honduras. The acronym for this organization is COFADE, an organization created in 1982 to search for family members who were forcibly disappeared under the implementation of the National Security Doctrine during the U.S.-backed counterinsurgency wars of the 1980s. Ms. Oliva's husband, Tomas Natavi, was kidnapped and forcibly disappeared in 1981. Forced disappearance was used as a form of terror and psychological torture against social movement leaders during this period. COFADE is a lead organization in the defense of human rights and promotion of structural change in Honduras. Our other guest, Natalie Roku Sandoval, is a historian, social and political researcher, activist, and human rights defender. She served as a deputy information coordinator for the Opposition Alliance against the dictatorship between 2017 and 2018, and was listed as a candidate designated in the presidential formula of Xiomara Castro's Libre by the Liberty and Refoundation Party Libre in the 2021 elections, a position she declined in favor of an electoral alliance. Upon Castro's assumption of office, Natalie was appointed to lead the Ministry for Human Rights, where she led the process of institutional recovery and the state policy on historical memory. Her administration was characterized by strong involvement and territorial presence in areas with high levels of human rights violations and recognition of the victims of serious human rights violations. She currently serves as an advisor to the President of the Republic and is a doctoral candidate in history at the University of Salamanca, Spain, where she is developing her dissertation, Class, State, and Impunity, a look at transitional justice in Honduras, 1980 to 2000. Bertha and Natalie, thank you so much for joining us. And now I'll send it back to Terry, who will begin the conversation.
Mira, realmente hablar de la impunidad.
Talking about impunity, or starting to talk about it when it comes from a personal level, it can't be said without talking about the impunity, the institutional impunity, and the generalized impunity in our entire country. And we must also say that the same impunity is rampant in Central America as well, and among other countries that also went through a horrible crisis. We can talk about El Salvador and Guatemala as examples. Impunity is not something that was suffered only by a family. Impunity has been with us. It's repetitive. It's the complicity of the state with crime. And when a state is a complicit of crimes, such as crimes against humanity, specifically the forced disappearance, for example, the tortures, the political assassinations that took place within the framework of the national doctrine of security, and within that framework of geopolitical project. And that political project was created in the United States. That's where it all started with the Plan Condor, which is a product of, and that took place, or everything started with the imposition also of neoliberalism. So for us here in Honduras, we thought during those years in the 80s, this is more than 40 years ago, 45 years ago, we thought perhaps it wasn't going to reach us. It wasn't going to touch us. We were very naive to think this way.
So let me,
So as we were trying to be in or stand in solidarity with other regional countries, especially within Central America, the logic was that within Honduras, within the belly of Honduras, it is here that it would be allowed, and a strategy, a death strategy, was being created. Remember, during those years, that in the country we had the presence of different groups, different armed groups, not the regular ones, not the Contra. And another thing is what we saw was the military bases within Honduras as well, like the military base of Palmerola, for example. And so for us, as militants and citizens of this country, we saw the high risk that we were facing at that moment. Those military bases that were strange, that were foreign in Honduras, were not here to give us candies. They were not here to help us develop, not at all. They were here to eliminate anything that was a critical thought. They named it in that time. They would say that everyone was a communist. And so for me, that is super important to mention, for us to be able to see our history and see how it impacts us today. The communism itself was taught to us as if it was a disease, like if it was a pest, like if it was anyone that thought differently suffered from leprosy. And that was a thought that was injected in the collective imaginary. And so disappearances or forced disappearances was something that was normal, that's something that needed to happen because they used all media strategies to make people believe that the good ones were fighting against the bad ones. That's what they did in the 80s. Anyone who thought different would be thought of as somebody that was bad, and the good ones were going to save the country. They were families and groups of local economic power that were supported by the government of the United States. So for us, seeing all of that context, we knew that we had to get ready for many things. If we wanted to survive, it wasn't going to be by keeping our mouths shut. If we wanted to survive, we needed to raise our voice. And by raising our voice to them, what that meant, or for the people that were raising their voice, it was danger because those that would raise their voices were doing so out of solidarity. And so there was a lot of military training that was happening in Honduras, and the military in Honduras were trained in the School of the Americas. They were trained, and you know very well about this. They were trained in Argentina by the army in Chile. All of that human machinery was created to destroy. So what does that mean? So for us, forced disappearance, we had never lived it prior to that. We had never lived it. The impact of it, though, the impact of impunity is so strong because even up to today, we are not talking or there's no punishment to those responsible for what they did during that time because there is a pact. There is a pact where all of those families that were involved, that have economic power, that have religious power, that have military power, and that have political power, and that have the means, and they have the communication or mainstream media. They installed their own agenda. During that time, we knew them as like La APU. We met them, the Council for Development. And it was these families that they said that wanted to eliminate everyone. So what has happened since then for us, since we started mobilizing, it was very clear to us that first of all, the pain was ours, yes. The injury was also towards the entire country. But we needed to be clear what would be the path our South. We needed to define it to be able to reach our goal. And it was there that impunity of those years is the one that allowed in 2009 that allowed the coup d'etat in our country because it was those same families, those exact same families, that same elite, those same elite politicians, religious members that installed or that justified the coup d'etat. So this impunity stopped being a problem of just a family. Now it's a problem of national order that now of which now we're all at great risk because we only have 11 days left for the elections because it's the same groups that did what the same groups then as they are now. Internationally speaking, it's being controlled as well. And it seems as though, or what they want to make it seem as though there's appearance, they want to make it seem as there's no conspiracy. But right now in our country, there is a conspiracy, but there is a product of the question that was just asked to me. It's the product of impunity. To be honest with you, if we don't talk about structural change, impunity in our country, the situation is not going to change here. And you know that in other countries, and you know this quite well, in other countries where there's military coup d'etats, there is a violation to the Constitution of the Republic. and for us to be able to follow a path that is of respect for all citizens, what we have to do is we need a new social pact, a new constitution for the republic. But in Honduras, that has not taken place. And I'm not just talking about 2009, product of impunity. With the coup d'etat was in 2009, but then there was a president. A lot of people were murdered. Militants that were resistant were murdered, and then again, forced disappearance was a common practice once again. And then a lot of people also had to live in exile. Once again, we saw tortures. And today, those that did that, what they're saying is that the victims, that the people, of course, the people is the victim, the people are the bad ones, and they themselves are the good ones. And therefore, we need to recuperate the country from those bad ones, from the bad. But what has happened in Honduras, this impunity that we need to talk about. So the coup d'etat took place in 2009, but there was another coup in the middle of all of this turmoil in the Supreme Court of Justice, especially in the most sensitive and most important constitutional court. That's where it took place. And the magistrates that used to make up this court were given a leave because they did not agree to legislate, or they did not agree to or consent to interpret, or to they didn't want to lose sovereignty. And because they were not in agreement with this, then they were given a leave. And the only one that did not agree with this is now was created or made into the general attorney of Honduras. And that person was the one that decided that it would be okay to carry out so many acts of injustice, which include corruption, murder, persecution, prosecution. They used the legal system to persecute anyone who was considered the opposition.
I wonder if I can interrupt just a moment.
I was going to say that it was the recognized prosecutor for the U.S., like the 5-star general prosecutor in that moment, something that we should talk more later on.
Well, I think that's important to pick up with that, Natalie, because Bertha has given us some really very, very powerful historical reference as to the composition of society politically and in Honduras, and how, I mean, really, some really powerful testimony. But
I think that we can summarize something that I think Berta has clearly expressed, and it is that impunity, it's like the ruling system, has been the ruling system in our political framework and in our democracy the past 4 years or more. That's something that I'm researching for my dissertation, that impunity was in fact the founding pact of the so-called democracy.
And so maybe you can take us from that point to the present, Natalia, because as Berta alluded to, she clearly stated, it's a matter of the people recreating the society. And so how did that come to be, in part with the creation of Libre? This was a movement that turned into a party that turned out in November of 2021 for elections en masse. There was no question who won. the presidential elections in 2021. I mean, no question at all, the margin of win was so significant for Xiomara Castro. But all of that seems to be so fragile going into this year's presidential elections.
It was, in fact, our third victory, 2021. That's important to say that that was a social movement against the coup d'etat, that it's, in fact, the coming together of different social movements and a historical resistance of over 100 years against imperialism and against this capitalist, the barbarian capitalist system. But I just wanted to clear that up because it's important to say that the first election in 2013, we claimed that we won the election and it was a fraud, and it was more evident in the 2017 that the election was stolen. So I wanted to go back to one thing that you invited me to share, and I'm sharing my screen. I don't know if you can see it.
Yes.
No, that's great.
Yes.
Yeah. And you ask how the electoral context and the framework looks right now. And this connects with Berta because we are talking about the 80s. Why we are talking about the 80s in in today's election and about the US in today's election? But yeah, of course, and they are talking, and the Trump administration, Trump himself, is talking about communism. Lately, he is pointing to the elected mayor of the New York like a communist. So the term, in the McCarthy spirit of the term, of kind of dehumanizing the opponent by labeling them like communist, it's something that it's used both in the US and also in Honduras. But right now, the election looks kind of like this for the right and mainstream. No, it's not a mistake. That's Venezuela. And they're saying that we have in Honduras the development of a Plan Venezuela and Venezualization of Honduras. And Venezuela is sort of the new Cuba, the communist danger. And it has always been a matter of the narrative. No, so right now, it's the Honduras. It's at risk, and this is actually the subject of opinion article that a friend sent me from the Washington Post, I guess, or a mainstream journal in the U.S. Like it was going to be a new Venezuela in Central American Venezuelization. That's one side, and the other one, and that's the interesting thing, is what we are clearly seeing, and it's go back to 2017. This woman here, Heidi Fulton, was the charge of affairs, and she was kind of giving the blessing for the fraud. And then we got the presidential proclamation of Juan Orlando Hernandez by the State Department. We were still struggling and protesting on the streets while the State Department said, no, nothing else to discuss, even if the international observation in that moment said that the elections were really questionable. This is important for what Berta, I'm sure, it's going to address later, because they wrote an editorial about observing the observers. But in that moment, it was the US who proclaimed the presidency. And why is that possible? Well, in fact, in Honduras, it's not just possible. It has happened before. And it has happened many times, by the way. And it goes all the way back to being the kind of epitome of the Banana Republic. We were, in fact, the place that inspired the term Banana Republic. And as so, in all the first half of the 20th century, kind of the US department policy and the banana companies define the political game in Central America and specifically in Honduras. And after that, and after being the first place to operate the CIA coup on Guatemala back then in 54, we became, as Berta clearly pointed, the military base, the huge military base of the US in Central America. We still have that base, and it was not just one, but we still have the one, the important one right now, Palmerola. Palmerola, it's a base that today it's combined with the civil airport, but it still operates as a military base, and it has great capabilities. And something that's really important to understand is that Honduras, it's placed really in the center of Central America, and it has frontiers, both land and in the ocean, with all the region of the Caribbean. That's really important. So from here and Puerto Rico, and before Panama and Colombia, the US could control the whole region. So going back to the 80s, because that I think it's important that Berta was pointing out, in the 80s were when the constitution, the current constitution of Honduras was proclaimed. And it was in fact a pact to simulate, that is at least my thesis, it's a pact to simulate a civil democratic government. But in the background, what we have, and you in the US with the Iran-Contra scandal are really familiarized with that, it was that Honduras was a kind of puppet military republic or a puppet democracy with a military and CIA background, operating not just the dirty war in Central America, but also drug cartels. And that is important. And it's really important because when I hear the US saying that they're struggling and having a war against drugs, I, as a historian and as a student of that period, cannot understand how they can ignore the fact, that at least in here, the drug cartels and the now called narco state was created by the CIA covert operations in the region in Central America. So it's important, and even mainstream journalism about crime and organized crime pinpoints that the primary or biggest drug lord of Honduras was funded by the US, and it was working. He was a CIA operative. And if the audience wants to know more about not just Honduras, but the big lie that has been the war on drugs, I recommend especially this book. It's not just on Central America, but it mentions Central America, but it was about the cocaine coup. And how is that important for the current elections? Well, let's go back here on the presidential elections of Honduras. Do you know who was the one appointed by the State Department for the second time? It's a prisoner now in a prison in the US, because after his term, he was asked on extradition and convicted for drug smuggling and gang smuggling and many things, which I'm not saying it's not true, but what I'm saying is that those are the crimes that the US points, because his crimes are far much more here in Honduras. So that's kind of how it goes with the elections in my country. We can have a quick overview of the elections, the important periods. In the 82, at the same time that we have the first elected presidency back to democracy, it's the time that Honduras becomes, that's important to see in a map. I guess I have one right here, that it becomes the US base to intervene in all Central America and the Caribbean. So democracy and elections were really convenient to have a stable, and I'm quoting all this because it was kind of a facade to have a military base in Central America. And what it has to do with the coup of 2009 and the elections, well, it has everything to do because we still have the base. Well, right now we have a deployment on the Caribbean, and that base and the ones that are in Salvador and other facilities are really important in geopolitical, geostrategical scenario. And the first time that a government intended to reclaim sovereignty on the base was in 2008, Manuel Zelaya, the president who was ousted by the coup. And recently, our president, Xiomara Castro, she has always said that she is socialist and left. And she said on January the 1st that if we will have massive deportations, the administration will consider the relationship regarding to the base, and she even mentioned the base. So ding 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 alert in that area. Being a socialist and successful in a really difficult scenario and country, it's already a threat. But now, if you're saying that you're gonna reclaim your sovereignty, and our presidency has said, it said it when it was Manuel Zelaya, and he has said it, and Xiomara Castro has said it now, that we are not going to give our territory to attack our neighbors or attack another countries. As president of the community of Latin American states in the beginning of this year, we were as a presidency vocal about making Latin America a peace zone. So it's a kind of sovereign government in the relationships. We're not talking about the other things because there are many other things like opening relationships with China and so on. But just talking about impunity, the crimes committed in the 80s for 1 decade to have the Honduran territory being the US base and serving the US interest were in impunity and are in impunity until now, because it was a kind of the pact and the convenience, and it led the country to be one of the most violent countries. This is something really impressive, how our country became the most violent country. And after the coup of 2009 that Berta also pointed, it was not just one coup, because people talk about the coup d'etat in Honduras and they talk about the 2009. But there's also the 2012 against the Supreme Court. She already said it, to establish an economic kind of free independent cities for the libertarian called sedes. Well, it has many names. And the other coup, it was the electoral coup. And this electoral coup, I will remind that it was the Charge of Affairs of the US Embassy there in the electoral tribunal, like given the blessing. And after that, there was the Trump administration, not just saying and blessing and proclaiming the current drug lord in prison in the US as a good friend, but also certifying him as a human rights compliance country while we were struggling in the streets and getting killed dozens of people for the electoral fraud. So this is kind of the scenario. And as you can see, from the very beginning of these electoral processes in Honduras, they're being linked to many things but democracy and to foreign affairs, especially US foreign affairs. And it is my claim that, and our claim, many of us, I think I can include Berta, that right now, the international community and the current political landscape, it's playing a major role. And it's playing a major role by downplaying some things and by creating a narrative. And that is something that I want to end up with this intervention. Sorry if I'm taking long. And it
No,
is,
no, it's great. So,
it is about the recent silenced in the mainstream, but the recent and most important leak, the audio leak, the Cosette's audios. This woman here is the councilwoman, one of the three council members of the National Election Council. And some weeks ago, like 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was the general prosecutor himself. He uncovered these audios, and you can hear there are 26, 27 audios. You can hear they're not conversations. So it's not like they intervene phone calls. There were audios, like you send an audio on one of your IAM applications. So you send the audio and the audio can be forwarded, or well, you have 27 of those audios, and they reveal a conspiracy that goes back to the primary elections, a conspiracy that mentions important things that I don't see in international mainstream and that are important in this context for the US solidarity movement. And those are the involvement of the US embassy, clearly saying that the embassy, it's given leads. It's not just in those audios. There are political candidates that have said that I'm doing this because I got approached from the embassy to ask me to go and support these candidates for the right. And the other thing is the involvement of some international observation organizations on creating this whole scheme of this destabilization. It started months ago. In fact, it started prior we took office, because the first goal was not to let us took office. Then the presidency has been really vocal about all the conspiracies, all these years, all the tensions for the election of the Supreme Court, for the election of the general prosecutor, to create the scenario for an uprising, an upheaval, a social crisis, to make not able the administration to finish the period. So the elections were in jeopardy because the government itself was threatened from the very beginning. And now the final step of the destabilization of this government, it's not to get to the election, but if we go to the election, make our triumph, because I'm pretty confident, believing that we are going higher on the polls, and not because I believe on the polls, but because when I'm seeing all this scheming, and when I see the U.S. Department and many of the officers saying they are concerned, I tend to believe they are concerned because we are winning. So in order to prevent us to take office or to continue in office and not be the servants of the regional and hemispherical policy, they are scheming to make the Libre Triumph illegitimate. And in order to do that, they have to create the narrative, and they're doing it. And they're also doing many things that you can hear in those audios. But I'm pretty sure, because I've been reading some news, international news, and they're not saying that. They're saying there are concerns for many things, but there are not concerns because 3 council people, just 1 is from the government. So you have 2 from the right, 1 for the government. And how is it possible? You just don't have the numbers. The same happens in the Congress, the same happens in many spaces. But this is the reality we have now. And I think that after this, what we are doing here is just an alert, because we have a narrative of Venezuelization, concerned on liberties and independency and human rights, questioning in advance the legitimacy of the process. So what I think we are doing here, at least for what I've read of COFADE's editorials recently, and what we are really concerned is that they're creating the scenario for the questioning and not recognizing and not saying that it was a fair election. And yes, we are afraid it's not going to be a fair election, but because they are plotting not to be a fair election. And when I say they, I'm going to be really specific. I mean the far right that represents the 2 political parties that have been representatives of the interest of the oligarchy in Honduras. Berta addressed this. These are those families that control the territory, but also that have links and that have been partners for over a century of the US policies, imperialist policies on the region and on Honduras. Those are the people that have been benefit with impunity, and they are being aided by some of the international community. That includes, and that's the concern, that the audios have revealed that might include even international observation.
Thank you, Natalie. I have a ton of follow-up questions for you.
Neat.
And so first, I do see something here. This is just basic Honduran fact. One of you, James, thank you. James is clarifying Castro, who Natalie is talking about, is Xiomara Castro, not Fidel Castro of Cuba. So this is so you mentioned, oh gosh, loss of the military base, which Xiomara had overtly stated earlier this year, that if the deportations get so heavy that
she won't allow that. This is important. A military deployment against another Latin American country from because it has happened before. The US aggressions in our territory to Nicaragua, to El Salvador, even to Grenada and other countries using that base.
Yeah, it's the launch pad.
Yeah.
For the Caribbean, and and I think that's really, really important given what we're watching now with, Venezuela and the expansion into Colombia and across the Caribbean, now with threats into Mexico here, where I'm talking to you from, and other Caribbean island nations as well. So that's a huge thing to keep in mind as we approach November 30th, that base. You also mentioned Xiomara re-elevating or re-accentuating the zone of peace, which is a concept that CELAC embraced. I think it was 2014 that became part of the CELAC doctrine, and that is, all of the Caribbean and Latin America. So that's a big a big thing for the US and her allies to push back against. You mentioned two candidates to the right and the Libre. Can you tell us who those three candidates are? Just briefly, short bios about the three of them.
Yeah, of course. I don't have pictures, but I think we can quickly find something looking on the internet right now to share. But I'm going to start with the far right. And we have Nasri Tito Asfura. Nasri Asfura, it's the candidate of the former ruling party that is linked to Juan Orlando Hernandez, and that was ruling for 12 years after the coup d'etat. He was mayor of the capital of Honduras, and he has a lot of links to Juan Orlando Hernandez and to other shady operations, and he's under investigation of the general prosecution. So there's many things that you can point on. Nasri Asfura, he represents the right, the conservative right of the traditional right. As you can see, that is something important to see, is that you're going to see foreign, Palestinian, and Arab last names. This is something curious about Honduras, that we have an elite that come, part of that elite are Palestinian and Arab descendants. And that is tricky in terms of Honduras, because they are the elite and oligarchy here. So this election, it's also an racialized somehow election as well, even though he was born in Honduras and he defines himself as a Honduran. There are differences in here, and even on status, about being an Arab descendant. The other one is Salvador Nasrallah. Also, he is right. He has been jumping from one party to the other. We had an alliance with him in 2017. Xiomara Castro declined her candidacy to give it to him as lead candidate, and we won the election. That was the other thing. And even he said that the US said to him that because he was with Libre, he won't get the presidency. He even has stated that publicly. And he now represents kind of the salvation of the Liberal Party. It's the other traditional party. He was at first presented like an outsider. Now he has been on politics over a decade, so it's not an outsider. And he represents kind of the alternative to recover that Liberal Party that was torn apart after the coup d'etat of 2009. So he is claiming he has more votes than the full body of electors are possible. He's claiming many things. He kind of feels like he is kind of the Trump of Honduras. He presents himself like that, like really loud speaking and saying many things that not necessarily are connected to reality, and sometimes are blunt lies. He has a really misogynist approach to politics and to addressing both Xiomara Castro and the candidate, the current candidate, Rixi Moncada. He has been in medias and in TV for over 40 decades, so he is popular because in here, football soccer, it's really popular, and he has been the voice on these matches for decades, like the voice of Honduras, screaming goal and saying all of this. So he has his popularity. He's still in TV, but he is kind of the hidden card for the trick in the election, because we already have the results of the internal elections, and he didn't have the votes. He even had less votes than before. And finally, we have Rixi Moncada. And she is the candidate, the second female candidate in a so still machista country like Honduras. She is the second female candidate to the presidency of Honduras. She has a long sheet of being a public servant, being a teacher. She became a teacher, then a lawyer, then she was judge, then he came to office to be Minister of Labor and then Energy. This is important because she was the liaison to Venezuela and Hugo Chavez on the Manuel Zelaya government. She was, after that, defender as a lawyer of other persecuted members of the administration of Manuel Zelaya. And then she was Minister of Finances, and then Minister of Defense with Xiomara Castro. So she has a long sheet being in office in public as public servant. She is, we hopefully going to be the first country to have a woman give office to another woman for the first time. If the plot, we manage to contain the plot, because the plot is still going. And this is, I think, the major alert that we are saying, because we have the candidates, but it's not just the candidates. And that's important, and especially for the US audience, that it's the territory and the geopolitics on the region. So we are not just talking about an election in Honduras, because Honduras is a small country in Central America. It's because Honduras is a small but important hub for the Central America and the Caribbean, and it's setting a bad example. And I'm going to end with this, this intervention. This was kind of the context after the coup: poverty, migrant caravans,
No.
social upheaval, and this, the most violent city in the world. I'm not saying in Central America, I'm not even saying Latin
No,
America,
in the world.
in the world.
Yeah.
2 years after the coup d'etat, it was my city, and it was real. It was like raining guns and fire. And this, and I'm saying, I'm not trying to be objective, because I'm not, and I'm a government involved and a militant, but these are achievements that you can find in international reports. You can find, well, yesterday, the national survey on homes was published. This is public information, that it is a huge poverty reduction. I mean, 13 points in less than 4 years. A violence and murder rate reduction, historical social investment, recovery of the public finances, illiteracy elimination, less irregular migration, roads, elimination of the zones of special development, that ones that that were the reason for the coup to the court, the Supreme Court, and subsidies, especially to poor families in energy, recovering the energy sector as a public sector, and significant human rights advancements, even though the mainstream are expressing deep concerns for the human rights. Of course, there is a significant and difficult scenario of human rights if you come from not just a dictatorship of a drug dealing organization, but as Berta stated, we come from an impunity state for over 40 years of disappearing of political and military and policial forces being able to kill as a state as a state policy. So obviously there are still challenges, but it's amazing. I mean, it's amazing how they're twisting and creating. We have in Latin America this kind of magical realism. I don't know if it's a term that, well, is that, but it's a magical mirror. So they're kind of mirroring back the things and pointing things to the current administration, the Xiomara Castro and Libre administration, and this is what it's going to win the election. It's not the other things. It's that they're really, and we are really doing something to take the country out from the mud and the abyss it was going to. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to take 4 years, not even 10,
It's not going
to
to happen
recover
in
it.
one administration alone can't make the change for decades. I mean, it's going to
But
take a continuation.
I have,
of course,
I'm so happy you're sharing these achievements, because I read a report published by CEPR, Center for Economic Policy and Research, excuse me. And it mentioned a lot of these
yeah, even
these achievements, but also the IMF debt that Xiomara's government has been able to manage quite successfully. Foreign
even
debt has been managed very well.
the State Department said that in order to consider the temporary protection program,
Mhm.
we have to be a country with a lot of issues, and it was not the case. And they made kind of that's incredible. No, that they're saying in one hand that we are doing so much progress than our people in living in the U.S. without the all the administrative and legal compliances. They are not in need to be protected anymore because our country is better by
You're doing so well.
no, and many international organisms are
Yeah.
saying it, but in here, as I was telling you before, what they say, let's come back to this, is
Yeah.
we are going to become Venezuela and
Yeah.
other things because we didn't do it in 4 years. We're just laying the ground. So
Exactly.
we're going to do it in advance. And that is something that it's really concerning. It's really concerning what is happening in the Caribbean and how they are aiming to control again the Central American launch pad.
Yeah.
I had a question. Just curious, how is the government promoting all these positive gains to the population in advance of the election as a way to motivate people to understand, what has happened over these last 4 years?
They're they're aware, and they sometimes say that we talk a lot and too much about the past and about historical context and about what has caused, how much has caused to Honduras to be trying to get better again, and how much, because there's financial sacrifices and many things that this government is doing in order to be able to cover the needs of the most extreme and vulnerable impoverished populations. And of course, the narrative is the same. It's populism. It's not investment. It's a spending, and it's an irresponsible way to manage the state's finances. And the other important thing that this government is promoting, and the candidate Rick Simoncada is promoting, is to have the rich people to pay taxes, because 10 families, 25 economical groups link to the transnational economics. They don't pay taxes. They have shell corporations. We were in the verge to become a paradise. I don't know how's the term. When you have this place where you don't declare and pay taxes paradise place.
Oh,
That
yeah.
thank
Mhm.
you.
Tax
Thank you.
haven,
Yeah, we were
tax
in
haven.
urge to become a tax haven because our elite, those 10
Mhm.
families, they're not just impune about the crimes and the support of the crimes of the 80s and the military and all of that. They're also financial crimes. But there's no crime because they made the laws, because they have the congressman to make the laws, and they are able not to pay taxes. Even fast food in here, fast food like the ones, Burger King and McDonald's and others, they don't pay taxes because they declare themselves like touristic entrepreneurs. And those is and that was the case with Sede also. And they were going to be able to have like their own, even not constitution, but their own laws, their own educational system, everything like libertarian dream. So
So can we just briefly explain that, just because this has come up twice now, just for the audience? These Zetas are basically sovereign free enterprise zones. They're like within a country, Honduras specifically, and they are their own sovereign entities for industrial purposes. So they work outside of the Honduran constitution, outside of law, and they're their own sovereign industrial entities. And Xiomara got rid of those, which
got
caused
rid, got rid legally, and that is the beginning of a process. Right now, the corporations and many corporations are trying to bankrupt the government in the international system in order to make us turn back and give them the laws that were promised by the regime of Narco Juan Orlando about sedes, because those were like do whatever you want scenarios. Even there are reality shows in the US depicting people going here to a sede place to make experimental kind of medicine to be young for many decades more, and experimenting on genetics and things. And I think that Berta may be joined because she has been also part of the movement against the SEDI figure and the sale of the territory, and also the indigenous people. It's being taken out of the territories in order to establish, because they said it was unpopulated areas, but in fact, it is almost all the territory if we kept going that way.
Let me, my gosh, we could probably talk all evening about the whole context of what's happening in Honduras with all of you. I wonder if we could take the last few minutes of our episode and address a couple things. The loyalty of the military and the national police in Honduras, where they will fall on election day, regardless of the results. Where do you see them? What's their role and loyalty? And then also, we've been hearing from me here in Mexico, not heard this in the US press, but I have heard it, here, that there's a shadow legislature, shadow National Assembly being constructed in Honduras. And of course, those of us who have done, work in Venezuela are very familiar with that sort of thing. So is there any truth to that? And how do one or both of you, Bertha, feel, interpret the military and national police in this moment?
Yes, I am
No, está
listening.
bien.
I am listening.
Venga.
No hay duda que
There is
hay
no
un
doubt,
plan
definitely. There is no
de
doubt that there is a plan.
conspiración desde
There
hace
is
casi desde
conspiracy
que inició el
since
gobierno de la presidenta Xiomara. Y ahorita
Xiomara's
se está
government
viendo como
took
más
over the
precisión ese
government,
plan de
and now
conspiración,
that plan is
porque
taking
la apuesta es
or
que
it's
no
perfecting
vuelva,
itself
que no vuelva Lula.
because they want to come back to power.
Es impresionante
And it's unbelievable,
cómo
or it's
están
incredible how
empecinados
that they're so
por
staunched, or they're
salvar el
holding
bipartidismo.
on to
La
save
idea es
the
salvar, no es
bipartisan
salvar a un
politics.
partido en
It's not
particular,
about
sino el
saving one
bipartidismo, porque
specific
ese grupo
party,
siempre ha
but a
gobernado el
bipartisan, because
país
that
y
group has
solo se
always governed
turnan,
the country, and they just
solo
simply
se han
take
turnado.
turns. They take
Y
turns.
así ha sido inclusive
And that has
con
been
el
the
tema de las
case, in
Fuerzas
fact,
Armadas. Pero
with the
la pregunta
military
es concreta
forces.
y voy a
But
ser
the
concreta.
question, it was very concrete, and therefore I want to be very
Por
concrete with my
convicción
answer.
y por
As
razón,
out of
soy un
conviction, out of
antimilitarista.
reason, I am
Un
anti-militarism.
antimilitarista nacional
Anti-militarism
e internacional, porque
nationally
sé lo
and
que
internationally,
han
because
hecho las
I
fuerzas
know
militares y
what
ahí siempre
the
soy
army or what the
casi
military
colombiana
has
al son
done.
de un. Y con eso quiero decirles, yo no me
And
confío ni un tantito
I
de
don't
ninguno que ande
trust
uniformado.
anyone that
Así de
is
sencillo.
uniformed. It's that simple. It's that
Porque
simple. I don't trust them at all.
en el presidente
Because
pasado, en el
in
2009,
2009,
era el que dio el golpe,
the
el
one
que
that led the
acepta
coup
dar
d'etat,
que
the
dio el
one
golpe
that
porque iban a
accepted to
convertir el
to do
presidente
the
Zelaya
coup
a
d'etat
Honduras en una
to take out
Venezuela,
President Zelaya out because he would
pues
turn Honduras into a Venezuela.
parecía que era afín
It
al
seemed as
gobierno del
though
presidente Zelaya.
he
Y en los
agreed
últimos
with the
momentos se
government
dio
of
vuelta.
President Zelaya,
Que
but
hoy
then
es
after
prófugo,
that he turned,
hoy
and
es un
now
imputado
he's a
prófugo
fugitive. He
en
is a
condición
fugitive.
de celebrador de la salvación de este
And
país.
he
Así
celebrates
lo
this
hace. Imagínense
idea
la
of
impunidad
saving or
y
recovering the
el
country.
poder que tienen
Imagine
estas
the
fuerzas y
power,
a la
the
que estamos
impunity that these
nosotros
forces have, and what
sometidas
we're
de cara al
subjected
crédito.
to.
Y digo
Now
nosotros
that the
porque yo me
30th
considero
is coming
parte
near,
del pueblo
I
que
consider
creemos
myself
que
as part
no
of
debe
those
de
people,
volver una
part of those
tiranía como
people
la que
that
tuvimos
believe that we should not
durante
allow
12
that
años.
old tyranny to come
En
back, that tyranny that led for 12 years. We
es
don't want them back.
imputado
So
por los
he is
delitos
he is
cometidos
accused
contra la
for the
humanidad de unos
crimes
manifestantes
for crimes against
y
humanity, because there was a
atropellos
crime
a
against
otra gente en esas
one of the
manifestaciones
people that was raising their voices.
y está imputado por esos cargos,
And
es
so he's
prófugo, pero
accused,
aparece todos
he's a
los días.
fugitive, but we can see
Todos
him
los días
every day.
hablando
Every
y
day he
dando que él
talks
va a
and
salvar a
talks.
Honduras de la
He says that he's
malinchada,
going to
de todos estos
save
malinches que tienen
Honduras
el
from
poder. Esa
all
es
of
como
these people that
la
are in
historia.
power right now.
Y entonces,
That's
¿por
the
qué le digo
narrative that he
esto
continues to repeat.
de las
And
fuerzas
why do I
militares?
say this
Una,
about the military
los
forces?
militares
One of
son
them is
militares
because
estando
the
ejerciendo y no
military
estando ejerciendo.
are militaries,
Y
whether they
ahí
are
la amenaza
playing
que yo
their role
veo
or
más
not.
grande
And
en
so
este
what I see
momento
right
son los
now
militares, las
is
fuerzas militares en
the
condición de retiro.
military forces that are
Todos,
soon to
todas
retire.
en condición de
All of
retiro
those people that
fueron
are
los que
soon to
estuvieron
retire were
dirigiendo
the
el
ones
golpe
that were
militar de
leading
Estado
the
en 2009.
military coup d'etat in
Y hoy
2009. And
están
today,
realmente
they are
elevando su
really
voz
elevating their
y
voices, raising their
acompañando al
voices, and they
antimilitar
are supporting
prófugo del retiro.
this
Pero además,
fugitive that has been
diciendo
accused
que ellos
with
no van
murder.
a
And they're
permitir
also saying
que
that they will
Honduras se
not
convierta
allow Honduras to
en
become
una Venezuela.
Venezuela.
Lo otro que yo
Something else that
como
I
un
see
gran
as
peligro
well
para
that is of
mí
great risk and it's
son
a
esas
huge
tropas
danger
que
are
están
these troops
rodeando
these
y
troops that
cercando
are
Venezuela
surrounding Venezuela
bajo el nombre de
under the
combatir
guise of combating
combatir
or
el grupo de los
fighting
soles, como que dicen,
the group of soles.
pero-
Cartel de los Soles, un invento de Estados Unidos,
And
por
that
cierto.
is
y entonces
something
cuando
that the
se habla
United
del
States
cartel de
has
los soles,
created.
no es
It's
el
a
cartel
sham,
de los soles que
but it's
andan
not the
como
cartel that
combatiendo.
they're
Ellos
after.
quieren
What
apoderarse de
they
Venezuela
want
porque
is
ya
the
todos
power.
ustedes
They
saben
want
que es lo
Venezuela
que tiene
because we all
Venezuela.
know what Venezuela has.
¿Qué es lo que tiene Venezuela? El
And what does
interés
Venezuela have?
para el
And
gobierno de
the United
Estados Unidos.
States is interested in
Y
that,
es
in
petróleo.
obtaining that. It's
Por eso
fuel,
es toda esa, lo que estamos viviendo nosotros
it's
acá,
oil. That is what we're all seeing
es más,
here.
nosotros decimos de cara al
And
30,
once say
11 días, pero
we
yo
say,
sí
okay,
creo que
where
nos
there's
pueden
11
esperar
days left.
largas noches de agite.
I think there's long nights that
Largas
await
noches de
us,
agite
long nights of
no van a
agitation,
estar,
because
las encuestas dicen,
the polls
el
say,
planteamiento lo dice, la
the polls
aceptación popular
say there is a popular
se mide
acceptance that can
que
be
hay una
seen, that is
aceptación
very visible, that
por la
there's an
candidata
acceptance
del partido
for the
libre.
candidate for the Libre Party.
Pero también
There is
todo mundo
acceptance,
aquí
but
es
at the same time,
expectante
everyone
de
is
la
just
agresión
waiting and
que
expects
está
this
haciendo
aggression
de
that
una
is being
manera
created
brutal,
in a very
tanto a la
brutal
presidenta de la
way,
República
not only against the
como
president of
a
the
la
republic, but
candidata
also to the candidate or against the
del
candidate
Partido
of the
Libre, ¿no?
Libre
Como
Party,
Richie Moncada. Digo
Richie
agresión de
Moncada,
parte de
and
estos
this
grupos
aggression
que
from
nunca
these
antes se
groups that
había
have never
lesionado y dicho todo lo que se está diciendo a
that
una
have
presidenta en
that have
funciones y
never
una candidata
or that are saying
a
things
ese nivel.
against this
Es
candidate that are
ciertamente
unprecedented. Nobody has ever expressed themselves that way, but they continue to say it.
el peligro
So there is a great danger
es
here.
fuerte.
There
Porque
is a
los
lot of
militares, por eso
danger.
les
There's a
digo,
great
están
risk
en
because the
retiro, son
military,
militares,
they're about
tienen
to
formación militar.
retire.
Más de
However, they
algunos de
continue
ellos
to
son
be
tesones.
military.
Y el que está prófugo
Right.
es tesón.
And
Entonces,
there's
yo
also a
sí
The
fugitive
military
there.
on the outside of the government, which is even more precarious.
Claro, porque no hay control.
Yes,
Sí.
of
Porque
course,
son como
because there is no
fuerzas.
control,
Ese es
because
el
these are
peligro
forces,
también.
and that is a
Son
huge
fuerzas
danger as
que
well.
están
These are
entrenadas,
forces
que
that have
tienen
been
capital, que
trained,
han
that
tenido
have
vínculos
capital, that
con
have
todos
links
esos
with
negocios
all of those
ilícitos
illicit businesses that have
riqueza, que
accumulated
la ponen, la van
riches,
a poner a la
wealth, and they're
disposición,
going to
ya la
use
están por una
this wealth.
maquinaria desenfrenada a la disposición.
They are
Entonces
willing to
sí
use it
se puede aquí
to
hacer una
destabilize,
revuelta de mayor
because what
intensidad que
they
en el
want to
2009.
do something worse
Nosotros
than what
eso es como
happened in
alerta y
2009.
preocupadas
So
porque
for us, it's a
sabemos
warning
lo
because
que
we
sufre el
know
pueblo y
what the
sabemos lo
people
que son
suffer, and
acompañar de ver a
we know what it
a
is
los que
to
son
see
violados, a las
the
violaciones a los derechos
people when
humanos.
the rights
Es
are
muy
violated.
fuerte
We know
y lo
we've
que a
lived it.
nosotros nos
It's
preocupa en este
horrible. And one of the
momento
things that worries us
es
or
la
concerns us right
ausencia
now
de
is
la
the absence
información
of
en pantalla a
information
nivel
on the
internacional
street,
del
on screen
riesgo
at an international level of the
del riesgo
risks
que
that we are
estamos.
seeing right now in Honduras.
Y yo apelo, por ejemplo,
And so
a que hagamos
I'm doing
cadenas de
a
voces
call
y
out.
estar
Let's
atentos
talk. Let's
lo que
have
pueda
chains of
pasar, que
information. Let's pay
lo que
attention
yo
to what's
deseo, por
going on.
supuesto, yo creo que
What I'm
Natalie
hoping
también,
for, and I
que
think
se
Natalie hopes
vaya a
for the same thing,
elecciones,
is that we go
y
to
yo tampoco
elections.
no creo que se
And
gane quien gane y que Santas Pascuas, no. Es
and
que
I
se ha
don't think that
acostumbrado
whomever
a decir
wins,
esta
I don't think
frase
it's going to
y
be
unos
a
días antes
peaceful
a
win,
meter miedo, después decir esa
because
frase
what they
para
do
vivir
is
en el disfrute de la impunidad. Nosotros
what they
creemos,
do
y
is
lo
they want
hemos
to continue
dicho,
living with
y lo
impunity. And one
estamos
thing we've said, and
trabajando
we've said this
sin
before,
recursos, pero
without resources, we're
decididas a
working it,
hacerlo,
but we're very
es
firm in what we do. We
observar
want to
a los
observe.
observadores
We want to observe
internacionales,
the
porque también
international
ese es
observers,
otro
because
peligro
that
que
is
nosotros
another great
consideramos
danger. We consider
que
to be
tienen
a danger, because
las
that's
próximas
something that
elecciones.
we can
Los
expect in
observadores
the next
aquí
elections. The
en el
observers here in
2017, si mal no me equivoco, en el
2017, if I
2013,
remember
hubo
correctly,
un
or
miembro de
2013, there
la
was a
observación
member of
internacional
the
de la
international
Unión
observers
Europea
of the
que se
European Union.
desmarcó
he
de
came
de esa
and he
observación
unlinked
oficial
himself from that
y
official
dijo
observation and
las
said
anormalidades y que
he
estaba
talked
en
about the
desacuerdo
abnormalities, and he said
con
that
la
he was
delegación
disagreeing with the
en la que él
delegation
acompañaba
that
por
he
haber
was coming
dado
with, or
como
that
exitosa esas elecciones.
by
Los
calling those
observadores,
elections
fueran
as
internacionales o
or
de esa
for the
gente,
elections being
juegan
won.
un
And so it
papel
was observers, international
importantísimo.
observers, that play
Y
a
más aún
very
si esos
important role,
observadores
especially if these
vienen ya
observers
con una
come
línea
with
definida
a
de
defined
dejar
line
colocado a
to
un
leave
candidato
a
que
certain
sea
candidate in
el que
power, a
considere el
candidate
poder
that they
hegemónico
consider, or that the
dejando el
hegemonic
instalado.
powers
Entonces,
considers to be the
observar a
best
los
candidate. So
observadores
we
no
need
es
to
una
observe
tarea
the
fácil,
observers, and
pero
this is not
sí
going to
creo que
be an
debe
easy
de ser
task.
una
But
tarea
I
en los que
do think
estamos
that we
comprometidos
all
y
need to do, especially
comprometidas de
all of
ver,
us that are
primero,
committed to all of
quiénes
this.
son.
First of all, who are these people? Let's
Segundo,
identify
cuál es
who are
su
these people.
rol
Second, we
y
need
que
to identify
no
what is their
suceda
role,
lo que
and
sucedió en
we
el
cannot
2000, ya no me
allow
acuerdo
what
si fue el
happened in
2013 o en el
2013
2017,
or
cuando una
2017
funcionaria
when
hacía el rol
an
de
officer who
embajadora
played the
de
role
Estados
of
Unidos fue a
ambassador of the United
declarar
States, she
ganador
went
al
to
señor y
declare,
al
she
expresidente que
declared
hoy
the
está preso en
ex-president
una
that is
cárcel de Estados
now
Unidos.
is in jail in the
Yo
United
sí creo
States.
que
So I do believe
tenemos
that
motivos más que suficientes
we have
para
enough
estar
reasons to
animando a
be
la gente,
alert, to call on
acompañando a la
people,
gente,
to
pero eso no
support
quiere
people.
decir
And
que
that does not
debemos
mean
borrar las
that
preocupaciones.
we should stop
Ese
worrying
momento
or stop having
decisivo,
our
porque yo
concerns.
lo
This
creo
is
que
a
lo que
decisive
se nos
moment,
viene ahorita
because
es
what's
un
coming at
momento
us is
decisivo.
a
O
moment, a very decisive
continúa
moment.
la
One,
impunidad, los
impunity could
golpistas,
continue,
los que
and
han
those that
saqueado
support the
al
coup
país,
d'etat uh,
esos grupos
can
que han
return.
hecho
Those groups
desastres
that
en este
have
país,
done disastrous
o
things to our country
continúa
could
el
return,
proceso ya
or we can
iniciado
continue with the
con la
process
presidenta
that was
Xiomara Castro.
started with the President
Yo solo
Xiomara
quiero
Castro.
resaltar
I also
que
want to
siempre lo
highlight,
digo,
and I've always
uno de
said
los
this,
grandes logros
one
desde el
of the
primer
biggest
momento
achievements
de
since the
inicio del
first,
poder de la presidenta
since
Xiomara
her
Castro
first mandate
es
from Xiomara Castro,
devolvernos.
is to return, or to
A
give us back,
nosotros nos
to give
devolvió
us
el
back
color
the
de
color,
un emblema nacional, o sea,
of a
de la
national emblem,
bandera. Es
of
el
our
símbolo
flag,
patrio que
that
nosotros
symbol,
más respetamos.
that
Lo
symbol that we
habían
respect so
confundido de
much
tal
was
manera que le habían
confused in such
el
a way
color, se
that
lo
they
habían
had even
puesto del
changed the
mismo color
color,
de uno
the
de los
same
partidos
color
que
as one of the parties,
tradicionalmente
of the
está
traditional
vinculado con los
parties
golpes
that
de
is
Estado.
linked to
Ese
the coup
símbolo
d'etat. So that
marca un
symbol,
antes y un
that in
después.
itself
La dignidad
defines a
del pueblo
before and an
reflejada en su
after, the
amiento. Claro, por
dignity of the
supuesto,
people
que
reflected in those colors. And of course,
eso no
that is
lo tomaron como un desafío los grupos de poder,
for
pero
the people in
es
power, for those
educar
in
al pueblo,
power,
porque yo sí
they
creo que
saw
nosotros
that as a
debemos de educar
defiance,
en temas de conciencia
and we have to raise
ciudadana y
awareness. We
debemos
need to raise
también de
awareness with
educar
the people.
al pueblo hondureño en temas de la memoria.
Can
And
I just
also
say something?
restore historical memory to the Honduran people.
Well, yeah, the memory is huge, and not just in Honduras, across the Americas, actually, I would argue. Can I just add something with Bertha just so beautifully described the flag? Prior to Xiomara's election, the flag was blue and white, but dark blue and white. And when she was elected, the flag went to the Caribbean blue, or turquoise, I guess we would say in the English in the North, turquoise blue and white. So and that is the flag we use to promote this episode. So the turquoise blue and white flag, Bertha, we use the flag that Xiomara restored. So I would really, did you want to say something, Natalie? Yeah. You're muted.
That even that the struggle for symbols, it's represented because the far right and those identifying with those political candidates are using the old flag, the old dark blue flag, like a way to kind of conservative restore symbol. Not just that, but it is important. I even well, many people have pictures of the two Honduran flags. You know, in here, when there is a game of football or something like that, they sell Honduran flags and they sell the two colors. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, it's
Wow.
polarized everywhere, even
That's,
the colors.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm so thankful for this enormously informative historical and current context conversation. And I'm hoping for the best of all possible outcomes on November 30th. And I also would really love for the two of you to come back after the elections and we can deconstruct November 30th for our audience. I would just, it would be really, really important and helpful. And so I wonder, Roxanne, is there anything you would like to add in closing our episode?
Oh, I just want to thank you both for this information that you've shared to really give us a sense of the context of the situation on the ground in Honduras. And I just really appreciate all of the information. Thank you.
Natalie, you had a comment?
Yeah, just a quick one to Jill in response to the state of exception and linking with what Berta was saying. We are in, it's not just worry, we're in anguish.
Yeah.
The human rights defender, I don't have the experience accompanying like Berta and COFADE, but I was there in COFADE in 2009. We were working together in 2017, and after that I was appointed to Human Rights Secretary, and I've felt what it's like for them in 40 years. For me, it's less than 10 years. And I'm right now in anguish, in deep anguish, thinking about what she said, the long nights ahead. So the state of exception, it's a policy that it's targeted to the person with criminal rep. So it's not a curfew for population, and it's not a suspended kind of military situation. And you have to understand the context and how Honduras was controlled by territory by gang members. But in this moment, when we have clearly also the context of the previous election, that there were gang members paid by the National Party and Juan Orlando to create the violence in the uprising and to be like the false flags to create the violent encounters and to promote more violence from the state. I guess the measure, considering that the risk of having an uprising and created uprising is very high, that's one of the things that it's taken into consideration. It's a really complex situation in Honduras, but what I want to say is that the human rights violations or repression is not a state policy. There's not a white envelope like do whatever you want for the military or the police forces. It was the case before, and we even have documented with COFADE and many other organizations stream live military and police officers killing people. This is not the case and hasn't been the case in this government. So it's really different, the context of a state of exception in a government which has the policy of repression and human rights violation than in this context. But it's really, I don't know, it's complex to understand how in this scenario, it may be the only way to maybe try to content a violent uprising and the kind of the uprising linked to the criminal organizations because they have the power. In Honduras, there were territories where the police and the military were not able to go inside because they control the territories and they create a lot of fear and terror.
That's not unique to Honduras either.
Yeah, and they were linked,
unfortunately.
yeah, they were linked even in the U.S. prosecution against Juan Orlando Hernandez. They openly say that they were linked to drug cartels and funding by drug cartels to create violence after the election to Juan Orlando be able to repress the legitimate uprising, pacific uprising, because that is something that I want to point out. We, and I'm speaking like a Libre member now, we are and have been pacific in all of the protests. We have been for over a decade, and this was a movement that became a political party, and we are the ones golpeados. We are the ones taking the hits all this time. So by principle, our government is not going to repress and has not repressed any social manifestations so far, and it's not planning on doing it unless there are criminal acts of gang and criminal members of the organized crime.
Okay, ladies, let's leave it at that. And let's hope, I think we're all just, hoping, praying, waiting for all of you to get through your long night, as Berta shared with us. And again, I would really love for us to have a post-election day conversation with all of us and deconstruct what happens on the 30th. So I would say from all my heart, thank you so much for joining us this evening and sharing all this fantastic information and very important information, especially for the global north. And I should give a big shout out to our two interpreters, Jill Clark Golub and Anna, I hope I say your apellido correctly, Anna Rugamos. You both were terrific this evening, and thank you for your hard work and a really sophisticated conversation to translate. So thank you so much for that. And a huge shout out to Code Pink for hosting us tonight, and for Grace especially for your technical support. And we'll see you all. Oh, and to the audience too, sorry. I know there's a few of you, and some of you had some really great questions. So thank you for joining us. And again, for those of you in the audience, we will be premiering the English version of this broadcast Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern on Code Pink YouTube. So thank you again, everyone. What an honor to work with all of you on this episode. And I look forward to a follow-up conversation.
Thank you.